Hi, my name is Ryan Weiss, and I'm the founder of Effective Performance Strategy. And I am honored and excited to have here today Dr. John Knight. Dr. John is a rocket scientist with experience leading teams at large organizations like IBM and NASA and Corning and Thermo Fisher. And we're going to be talking to him today about the alignment of people and process to accelerate performance. With his experience in rocket science and with his experience in leading these teams, we got a lot to learn from him. And I think we're going to have an amazing discussion together. So Dr. John, welcome. And thank you for spending this time in the studio today.
I look forward to talking with you.
Well, Dr. John, it is such a pleasure to have you. We've known each other for the past several months. We've gotten to know each other kind of through the book writing process,
Right.
both of us writing books. Yours is about rocket science retirement. The first book I wrote is called From Orangutan to Rocket Scientist. And it was a crazy name for a book, but there's a story about an orangutan.
Okay.
The story about this P5 rocket. The purpose is the nose cone of your rocket ship. It's where you go and why you go there. The product or your payload sort of is the second one. That's the value that you create. The people, who are the people on your rocket ship or on the ground crew? What's the performance of your rocket ship look like? And what's the process that enables your people to perform, to create value, and ultimately fulfill that purpose? And as you and I got to know each other, and I started thinking about this rocket ship that I've built my business around, and then I started to get to know you, Dr. John, and I want to start by getting you to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself. I understand you've got 5 degrees.
Correct.
That you're a rocket scientist, well, retired rocket scientist, and you've applied a lot of these principles as you've gone throughout life. So why don't you start by introducing yourself a little bit and telling us about who you are and how you came to be a rocket scientist.
So let me maybe start from the beginning. Grew up in a small town outside of Seattle called Bremerton, Washington. That small town is a naval base for the military. And so ships would come in and dock there and deposit 10,000 families in the small town Bremerton. And my father and my mother met at one of those kind of dating opportunities. And so I grew up in that kind of an environment, a very wholesome family. And then what was interesting was that in about the 6th grade, I started thinking about math and fell in love with math. And so one of my stories is that in the 6th grade, I could sit down and do my entire math homework for the week in one sitting. And I'd go back to the teacher and I'd say, is there more? Is there more? And so
that's not very common. Not many people in 6th grade are asking for more math homework. That's a great start.
So my mother then realized that I had this gift for math. And so she encouraged me and pushed me to just do well in math. And so by the time I finished high school, I'd taken every math course that existed. At that time frame, you couldn't really start college until you finished high school. So I finished high school and then went away to college. But then I kind of went into my little world of, this is just too good to be true. And so I kind of went off and did my own thing and got maybe a little bit of trouble, or at least started trying to get in trouble. And my pastor grabbed me by the collar one day and pulled me back and said, look, this isn't happening. You're too smart for this. You are now the youth pastor of our church. And so he's then introduced me to God, and because I grew up in a church environment anyway, and started trying to say, look, there's more to life than just having fun and doing things and hurting people and having fun and then doing something stupid. So get back on track with life. I then went to college, quit, tried to go to the Air Force, thinking that maybe I can be an astronaut because there was this big fanfare at the time frame about space. And so I wanted to be an astronaut. So I went back to school, and I went back to school with a vengeance. I ended up with a 3.75 double major in math and physics in 1974. Now, think about the environment in 1974 for an African American. Lots of money available, lots of opportunities available. You just had to apply yourself. And so IBM found me and said, here's an opportunity for you. We'll put you on site at NASA to be in the first cohort to work on space shuttle. And I said, huh?
What an opportunity.
So 20 years old, you're on site with a top secret badge, walking around NASA, working on a space shuttle. The idea was to build the software for this craft, and you were responsible for a portion of that software. And so that's how I got started in this whole world of being a rocket scientist.
That's an incredible story. So as you think about that history, as you think about sort of getting involved in that, and it sounds like you came from a very technical background, similar myself, right? I spent some time with math and chemistry, like my degree's in chemistry
Right.
and then finance, right?
Right.
So very technical background. And I think that's part of the reason we've kind of hit it
Right.
off as we've gotten to know each other. As you think about the technical background and that technical stuff that got you to that point, one of the key things in my next book and what we're working on is what I call optics. Mm-hmm. It's the alignment of people and process to accelerate performance. Mm-hmm. And when I think about optics, when I think about the word optics, it has two meanings. Mm-hmm. It's the study of light, mm-hmm. right? The study of light mm-hmm. and lenses and all those things. And then there's this optics, which is the perceptions of people. Mm-hmm. So there's this people and process to accelerate performance. So as you think about your career as a 20-year-old young man, walking around NASA, walking around with the IBM top secret clearance, right? You had these technical aspects, these technical elements that put you in that place. Mm-hmm. What about the people who you were engaged with and that brought you in, and how did that all work?
Yeah. So what was very interesting was, and I felt so honored when my teacher stood up before us and said, we have combed the country to find the smartest people we can find. And sitting in that class as being acknowledged as one of the smartest people in the country right now was just a tremendous honor. So I look around my other cohorts and say to myself like that, we are the cream of the crop. And for that time frame, it was just incredible. As I look back now, what was going on in my life, I didn't really feel that necessarily, that sense of the awe that was happening around me. It was just like I was just a kid trying to do something different and be different and make a contribution. And so it is important to have the right people. And IBM and NASA and all the companies around the country, McDonnell Douglas, the people in Washington, D.C., were really after trying to find the best and brightest people to put in that project. Because this was something that had never been done before. And so you want to put your best foot forward in terms of putting that together. And so when I think about even going back to businesses that I've worked for and led organizations, it has always been about trying to find the right people and put the right people in the right seats at the right time.
Well, tell us a little bit about the technical part of being a rocket scientist during that time. The shuttle algorithms you told me before, putting 10 pounds of software into a 5-pound box. Right. That's mind-blowing in 2023. Tell me about the technical part, and then we'll talk about the people learnings that you had during that time.
So at that time, the thought process was we had successfully launched Apollo. And so we had learned some things about what was happening with Apollo. Well, now we're talking about just going up and then coming back down. And then we had gone to the moon, and so we had learned a lot of things associated with going to the moon in terms of the astronauts. But now we're talking about sending a rocket ship and bringing it back to Earth without having to go through that whole process of rebuilding everything from scratch. So the technical challenges were there. And so things like, and so an area that I worked in was the software area. So the idea was to how do you build computers at that time? And I think about computers that are probably a little less dumber than our iPhones today.
A little bit.
And they were taking rooms, I'm talking about maybe 100,000 square feet of space to put 5 computers in one room in order to try to figure out how to get this. So the idea was that you take a launch and an orbit and then a re-entry. And the key is how do you measure all the aspects of space shuttle and the astronauts and the environment. And so the challenge we had was to try to figure out what do you do and how does the software work together? And what kind of systems do you put in place to monitor the astronauts, to monitor the spacecraft? And when everybody put all their requirements in terms of what they wanted to see in terms of data, I mean, there was probably like 20 pounds of sugar that you were trying to put into a 5-pound bag. And so the idea was what can you do, what can you live with, and what can you live without? For example, that spacecraft is traveling 17,000 miles per second.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that thing is moving and you have an idea of where it's going. So one little adjustment to an actuator, send that craft a whole different direction. So you want to know at that time frame, millisecond level.
So let's think about this. You've sort of articulated a few of the P's in this concept of the P5 rocket. The purpose. You were saying we've already been to the moon and back at that point. We've already, you've already kind of done some of these things, or NASA has already done some of these things. The purpose of what you were working on was we've got to get a rocket out into space, into orbit, and then re-enter and reusable, right? So,
correct.
So you're talking about that was the purpose.
That was the purpose.
What was the payload that was happening? What was the payload or the product? What was the value of this? Why were you working on it?
Yeah, so what NASA wanted to do was to try to figure out how do we begin to start improving technology across everything. Mm-hmm. So all these companies wanted to have different kind of experiments first in zero gravity. That's what was the whole start of it. And then the thought process, well, instead of just going up and doing an experiment and coming back, why don't we just build a space station where we could send our experiments up there and do longer study? Because the really intent is to how far can we really go?
Right.
I mean, people want to go to Mars. They really want to go to Jupiter. They want to go all over the place, but there's a lot of challenges associated with space travel. And so a space station was the first idea to take along all these experiments and send them to the space station and run these experiments on an ongoing basis. And then all of a sudden, the other thing was the whole militarization of the various satellites that are up there.
Yeah, excellent.
Because you got a lot. You think about there's satellites now watching everything.
So you've got this clear purpose, right? And what I like to say in terms of organizations is if the purpose is misaligned, right? If you think the purpose is to launch satellites, but the purpose is really to colonize Mars, those are two completely different shuttle designs, right? So an organization has to know what's the purpose, where are we going, why are we going there? Then you got that payload. So like you said, the astronauts being able to go up, can humans stay in space for how long? You needed some learnings around that. You talked about the performance measurements. You talked about milliseconds of performance and 17,000 miles per hour, and the data that was having to be compiled and processed in that short period of time. Then you had the people. So you had the astronauts. You mentioned earlier about wanting to be an astronaut initially, but then becoming a rocket scientist instead. Why did you end up becoming a rocket scientist instead of the astronaut and fulfilling that dream?
Well, that's a very interesting story. So coming out of high school, I joined the Air Force because one of the things that you have to do is you have to be a pilot in order to be considered to be an astronaut. So a military service to fly. So I went in and joined the Air Force and thinking I was going to go do the normal training to be a pilot and eventually compete for one of the spaces on Space Shuttle as an astronaut. But I'm colorblind. I have a red to green deficiency. I still can see all the primary colors, but if you look at a rainbow, I see the primary colors, but I don't see all the colors in between. So it's one yellow band, one red band.
Got it, yeah.
And so I said, well, wow, if I can't fly it, then what do I do? That then was my motivating thought around go back to school and go back to school with a vengeance. So imagine 1974, walking down an aisle with an advanced degree or a double major in math and physics, and the rest is history. It was for a 20-year-old kid. This is a huge honor. First in our family, our immediate family, to graduate from college, and so that was a big deal during that time frame. This is 1974.
Yeah.
And most of us probably aren't around in 1974.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few of the things here. So we've talked about purpose, the payload, the performance metrics, and then having the right people in the right seats. So you were colorblind, so you weren't qualified to be an astronaut, but you were qualified to work on the rocket ship and do these different elements.
Right.
And I think it's really essential in any organization to have the right people in the right seats. Some people are astronauts, some people are ground crew, some people are engineers, some people are and having the right people in the right seats. And then you also sort of referred to the nuance of process. You said, you change adjust something just a little bit, and you're not going to end up on the moon. You're going to end up, launching out into space somewhere in some crazy direction. So the core of what I work on in sort of my core belief is that clearly aligned processes should enable people to perform, to create value, to fulfill the purpose of that organization or that team that they're working on. And I see the alignment of all of these things. Do you see that alignment, or can you tell me how do you see that alignment through sort of that lens of your work at IBM and NASA Does that, how does that fit in?
So you bring back a story that I did not get a chance to work on, but it was clearly one of the biggest mistakes NASA had made when we sent out the Hubble telescope. The idea, perfect idea, send a craft that can travel beyond our imagination today, and just observe and send information back. Well, the lens on that craft was wrong. Somebody made a mistake, and they put the wrong lens in there, or at least the design of the wrong lens, and it wasn't sending the information that needed to go back. So if you remember correctly, they sent a craft back up there to replace the lens in the Hubble telescope.
I don't recall that. Interesting. So that wasn't your mistake.
That wasn't my mistake. That wasn't my mistake. But it goes to the point of, if you make sure you might have the right purpose, but the process of getting there was misaligned.
Yeah.
And it cost millions to go back and redo that process, to send just that lens up there and have that thing taken. And then at the same time, because you build something that's so unique and different, now you're and replacing the lens on Earth is one thing, but replacing that same lens in space was another thing.
Wow.
So there was a lot of different kinds of things that had to take place for people to really kind of get aligned with the process and making sure they were on track with the purpose they were starting with.
That's right.
And so that's the story that it just brings up so much about how important that the process, the people, and the performance all has to be aligned.
All has to be aligned.
It has to be aligned well.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah. So let's take a little bit of a step forward. So you learned all this stuff in rocket science. You were working at IBM and NASA, working on the shuttle, working on algorithms, those types of things, that technical stuff. As you moved into your career, then you started working at companies like Corning and Thermo Fisher and some other companies throughout your career. You're even the building commissioner in Chicago. So you've had quite an expansive career in different countries and all these different things. So when you think about the technical stuff that you learned as a rocket scientist, when you think about that type of stuff, how did that prepare you to engage with people, to perform, to lead teams and lead organizations?
So as a math major, there's a concept that is very unique to us mathematicians. And I think I used that tool throughout my career to advance the opportunities. And here's the concept. As a mathematician, you take a very complex problem and you break it into its smaller components, and you solve the smaller components first, and then you bring it all back together to solve the overall solution. It's a very unique skill that many mathematicians take for granted. And I use that concept throughout my career. So going to a company and having, like, for example, one of the companies I worked with, we had it was a laser company, laser technology. They were really focused on building a device that could do analysis for blood and different kinds of chemicals that they could pass through, that could check out the different sizes of the molecules. But the problem was, in that particular situation, we didn't have the knowledge that we really thought we had, not only to do the science, but then the next question became the user interface. And the two were misaligned, clearly misaligned. We spent millions of dollars trying to build a technology that wasn't going to work because we were misaligned in the people, because it's not so much the people doing the work, it was the people trying to use the equipment.
Yeah.
And so there's always that big distraction between the two of them. But throughout corporate, using the idea behind taking complex problems, breaking them down to their smaller components that are solvable, and then bringing it back together was really the key to my success.
Excellent. Excellent. So I've got sort of a mantra that I've developed that people without process get frustrated. And the corollary is that process without people is wasted. And so if you think about sort of that example you were just giving about, you've got this process, you've got this technology, you've got this stuff, but if the user interface doesn't work, what happens? Right? It's wasted. On the other hand, if you've got great people, if you've got amazing people, but you don't have the right process or right technology to enable them to do what they need to do, then they're going to get frustrated. So how did that play into some of this with that laser project that you had and worked on, you had some people involved in that, I think,
so
as well.
Let me move to another example. So the one I love the story. That's the glue.
Well, I'm an old glue guy. I spent 15 years in the glue industry.
So we were assigned this project to build the laser sighting equipment for a device that was going to go on top of a tank gun for Iraq for the war. And so the idea was that we could see it in the laser where we were going to point the tank gun and we were going to fire off the projectile and destroy the target. Well, somehow or another, that became misaligned. And it was firing and people were actually getting hurt. And so the big company came down on us and said, like, what's going on with this thing? So here we had a misalignment again of people and processes. And so we spent about 6 months studying every aspect of that laser sighting equipment and to come to find out that it was a glue that was holding a part down that was coming unglued because of the atmosphere that it was, or the conditions it was in Iraq. And everybody tested everything in terms of the glue and everything else. But we come to find out was the glue got switched because somebody was trying to save a nickel a gallon on the glue. And it was all the manufacturers were buying the same glue. And so everybody started having similar kind of problems. But in our particular case, it became a misalignment. And it's just so important that the whole team is on the manufacturer, the suppliers, the company building the product. I mean, there was a situation where we were not communicating and we had a misalignment that caused us a malfunction in our product.
Yeah.
And hurt people and probably lost lives in that whole process. So to your point, it is absolutely critical for that alignment to be there.
Yeah. So Dr. John, one of the things that in some of our previous conversations you've talked about is reinventing yourself every 10 years. I understand that you have 5 degrees,
yes,
including the, math and science. You've got a doctorate. You've got 5 different degrees. So tell me about this reinvention of yourself every 10 years and why that's important to you.
So I probably figured it out later in life than while I was going through it. But the thought process came up with about every 10 years, you got to go through a process of asking yourself, who am I now? And how do I prepare myself for the next opportunities ahead? So if I look back at my career, coming out of NASA, great opportunity, now thrust into business. And the thought process, well, I can't really do this without some more training. So I went back and got my MBA. 2 math degrees, now the MBA. And the MBA now propelled me into the opportunity to do business. And then I did that for a number of years. And then toward the end of that, I was thinking about retirement. My father was a assistant pastor of the church. And so he was always talking to me about the church. And I grew up in the church and was very close to the church all my life. And so thinking about being a pastor might have been something that I could see myself doing in retirement. But then I ran into a situation where it just wasn't feeling the right way to go. And so I asked my pastor, I said, is this something I really need to go pursue? Or he made a profound statement to me. And it says, many are called, but few are chosen. And if you weren't chosen for that role, don't do it. And so I ran.
This is a fit between your process, right? The skills that you've got, the technology, the technical skills, and the people, right? Your personality and how these things link together.
They didn't link together. And so then I went into higher education, which then required the doctorate degree. And that's how the 5 degrees. But the whole idea, though, was that as I look back now, I had to reinvent myself. And I used the education as a tool to reinvent myself for the next opportunity ahead. I love companies like Corning. How many ways have they reinvented sand over the next almost 100 years now?
It's incredible. They've sold a lot of sand over the years for way more money than what you can imagine scooping up a cup of sand for, right?
Right.
Right. Yes, exactly. Tell us about that. Yeah.
Exactly. And same thing with Quaker Oats. How many ways have they reinvented Quaker Oats? You look at what we had when I was growing up as cereal and what we have today in terms of cereal that Quaker Oats still is capitalizing the market on. And so the idea is that keeping yourself fresh and focused on trying to reinvent yourself. One of my other philosophies is that it's like I have this, I call it the 17-year rule. first 17 years, young, dumb, full of whatever you want to call it, and just doing stupid stuff, okay?
We've all been there.
We've all been there. But that second 17 years is your most critical second 17 years. Because now you've got to get a chance and take your career and get it on a launch pad and keep it going forward. Because at about 34 years old, that career path will either level off, continue to upward climb, or begin a decline. So you want to be very, very careful that you make that next 17 years real critical. You and I were talking to your son about that same story as well. It's so critical. So at 34 years old, I look back at my career and say to myself, like, whoa, vice president of this, president of this, general manager of this. So the trajectory kept going. And then you've got about 51, it changes again.
Yeah.
And so if you take that trajectory of your 17 years and lay on top of that a career change for yourself, because when I grew up, the thought process was coming along with that you're not going to be in a company for 40 years and retire. You know, people were saying at that time frame about 5 to 10 years in a company, and then you're going to have to change. And I look back now, that's happening. And everybody's got, unless you have your own business, that's what people are going through. And so companies have to really got to be thinking about where their people are today and where they want them to be 4 or 5 years from now. Yeah. Because all these things are going to change and they're going to continue to change. And so that whole understanding of how do you manage, develop, and grow people to the roles you want them in the future to be in is so critical. And unfortunately, to some degree, that's a lost art today.
Yeah. And it's a big challenge. So all right, so you got 17, 34, 51. I think, I don't want to specify your age. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but you're closer to 68 now, right?
No, I'm 71 years old.
All right, so even over 60. So that's another pivotal moment for a lot of people in their careers.
Correct. And so seniors today, I tell them, work as long as you can and save as much as you can. Because the key is not so much how much you make. And I tell people today, I don't care how much you make. It's how much can you convert that into a monthly income for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Because we're all going to live well beyond 2050. And so if you look at these last 25 years, the world will be very different if you look at these next 25 years. Yeah. Things like we've taken for granted, Medicare, Social Security, peace around the world. A lot of things we have taken for granted are not going to be the same anymore. Yeah. So putting money to work for yourself. And that then leads me into why I started what I do now. I've launched a company called Rocket Science Retirement. We're writing our second book now, Rocket Science Retirement, guide to successful planning and launching your retirement plan. Yeah. So that's the whole idea behind that.
I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we've kind of chatted about as well, that on that trajectory of life towards retirement. So you've reinvented yourself a bunch of times, rocket scientist, business leader, you've gone to Moody, you've got this pastoral experience as well. And now rocket science retirement. So you've reinvented yourself multiple times along the way. And as you think about now this new journey of helping people prepare for retirement, you've got the same 5 Ps are applicable, right? The purpose at any stage of life, that purpose, where are you going and why are you going there? Why is it important to save for retirement? Then you've got the value. What's the value of your portfolio and what value does it need to have? And then there's performance, right? There's growth rates, and are you investing in stocks or bonds or things like that? Performance metrics. Then you've got the people in your life. And the people in your life can have such an impact on your planning for retirement and the direction of your retirement. And then you've got the processes. What habits and behaviors are you putting in place? So I think these 5 Ps apply to rocket science, to business, and then to the retirement, as you just kind of started talking about.
Right. And as I think about business, there was so much value that people lost along the way trying to think through how do you move companies certain directions. So one of the examples I think about is a young kid, they lose their president, you're now the new president, and you walk into an organization. And the first thing that I always did was evaluate the people. Take the time to get to know the people, understand the people's potential, and make sure people are in the right seats. Because one of the misalignments I constantly saw when I went into new companies was that people were in wrong seats, and companies were just driving people, pushing them to go forward to do things that just wasn't fitting. I remember going to a company down in Connecticut. Again, we made specialized lenses and optics kind of equipment, and there were many people that were in wrong seats, and so some people left. One example was the chief scientist left. The engineering guy was the one to take the chief scientist position. We talked about it. We tried it for a while, but we realized that there was a misalignment. There's a difference process associated with a scientist and someone who's a chief engineer. And it didn't work. And so you have to be very careful when you think about how do you begin to start aligning people with the processes and the projects that they're responsible for.
Yeah.
I don't think people value how important people are in organizations as we did back in the 70s and 80s. I've seen a big transformation, but I think there's some value. And one of the things I would encourage you to think about is how do you push companies to get back to really understanding and working with people and making people of value? Because it's your most important asset. When you lose a person, I saw this. I lost $120,000 chief scientist, and it cost me probably $200,000 over time to replace him.
Sure.
And I had to pay him more.
Yeah. and I'm sure it delayed the project and everything else. So there was probably much bigger financial impact than just that replacement of that individual. Right?
I think about, there was this guy at NASA. He was kind of one of the smartest guys around. So when we'd run a simulation at night of the launch, and we had a computer error, they would dump the computer brain, if you will, on paper, and they would be just boxes of ones and zeros. I mean, boxes of ones and zeros, because it was the hexadecimal numbers we were reading at the time. He would take those dumps and he would go through it page by page and look for the error. Losing in the middle of that process would have cost us a fortune.
Yeah.
In that time frame, because we didn't have people who could do what he did. And I think companies have those kind of people, and they got to find them, and they got to nurture them, and they got to make sure that they want to stay, not stay, but want to stay, and continue to add that value back into the organization.
That's a great perspective. So you mentioned a story about glue a little bit earlier, and I think it is such a parallel, such a story that's related to this alignment of people and process to accelerate performance. You mentioned this concept of there was a glue on a laser sight that under certain conditions maybe didn't perform the way it was expected, and there was a reason that glue was selected, and the impact that had. So tell me, what was important about the glue? Why was the glue important, first of all?
Yeah, so when you put these equipment together, again, based on our technology at that time frame, glue had to hold something down, and then the laser had to do something there, and you had to integrate this, and you had to have the electronics to talk to the system and everything else. So all that being said, the idea was that once you put all that together, it was functioning well in a test lab. And so obviously we would take the equipment and we'd crank up the temperature and the humidity, trying to simulate the environment it was going in. And so we would test these things and it would work in the lab.
Yep. But so this is the process stuff. This is the technical stuff. As best you can do, you're testing out the process. So then what happens?
You take this equipment and you ship it to the manufacturer, who then takes it, puts the tank gun together and ships it to Iraq to be used in real operation.
Yeah.
Well, during that time frame, we didn't realize that somebody had changed the formula of the glue. And so now, while it performed well in our lab, it was failing in the field. And so having to use, at that time, an electron microscope to understand the product in the field, because we couldn't go back to our test and then trying to examine every component and trying to figure out, okay, what was happening. And simulating and trying to figure it out using all the math and the smartest people we could find. And coming back, somebody came back with an experiment and said, I did this, and this failed. I did this, this succeeded. Pointed back to the fact that the glue, we called the manufacturer of the glue, So like, here are our specifications. Are you meeting our specifications? Oh yeah, by the way, yeah. But you changed something.
And who changed something? Somebody in purchasing or something.
Somebody,
and they were going to save a nickel a gallon something like that.
Some purchasing guy bought a different glue just to make sure that he could save a nickel a gallon. Because everybody's under pressure to cut costs.
This is the alignment of people and process to accelerate performance. If everybody's not aligned in the same way for the same objective, somebody's getting motivated to save probably his performance bonus that year was based on how much cost savings do you bring to the company, and he saves 5 cents, right? And so he does what he needs to do. But when people throughout the entire system are not aligned together in the right mindset with the right ideas, then what happens? Everything can fall apart.
Well, here's another story that I was managing, and so we had this fiber optic network in the northeast part of the country. It was working well. And then one day it just shut down and we couldn't figure out what happened. And so we were making fiber optic amplifiers. That was our product. And they were putting these things in this mile network inside the optic network of the northeast. Well, one day it all failed. And people were like, what happened? And so we went back through the science, brought the devices back in, taking them apart piece by piece, looking at every component, studying it, trying to figure out what happened, what caused this failure. In the meantime, it's at our cost trying to figure out how to replace and keep this network going that we had. And to come to find out that somebody replaced a nickel part, nickel being the material, with a stainless steel part. It looked the same. They thought it would perform better, but it didn't, because now you're dealing with corrosion, and that's what caused the network to fail.
Wow.
So at our cost, we had to pull up miles of fiber optic network because somebody made a decision to replace a nickel component with a stainless steel component that had corrosion on it.
So even people with great intentions, right? Even people with great intentions can mess up the whole system if the system is not understood, if everything's not understood. So what are some of the things in your experience? How have you brought people and process together to be more successful? What have you learned from those things? What have you done in your career to bring that alignment of people and process together?
Yes, I have a good example. I had just gotten out of IBM and working for NASA. I'd gone to the phone company, so working for Ameritech, and I had got put in charge of the process of trying to figure out how to improve communications and tools and technology in the small business arena. So general manager, running an organization, about 12,000 people. And it was just a phenomenal job. Here again, young 20-something-year-old kid managing $1 billion budget for a phone company. It was just amazing. But one of the things that was interesting was that I realized that there was something missing in talking just to the employees. And so we were working on a project, and we were trying to figure out how to do 911 on cellular. And so what we decided was, I said, let's do something different. Let's just not talk about the different departments inside the company, but let's invite our vendors to be a part of what we're trying to do. So I had a monthly staff meeting with my team and the vendors integrated together. And we worked as one big team. And we finally figured out how to solve a very complicated problem. People falling down in 911 was not a big deal on landline.
So some of the people who watch this might not even understand or think about the concept of landlines, right? My son has never seen a landline to start with. So, you sort of think about this, but that is actually a really interesting problem. I remember when cell phones were first coming out, there was some type of user agreement you had to say that, I understand that this may not, be used in a 911 situation. They may not know my exact location. That type of thing was very big deal when cell phones first came out. Because everybody was used to landlines, picking up the phone and saying, I've got an emergency, and the fire department knew exactly where to come. Now all of a sudden you have a different situation.
So my team and the people I work with, that we've created some really unique time frames of technology to launch where we are today. That whole 911 story, again, the 911 didn't exist for cell phones. So bringing that team of people together that were both internal as well as external people, and they came up with a solution that we figured out and found a company that got to do some triangulation work for us, found another company to do this other kind of work for us. So we were able to actually demonstrate that you could dial a 911 on a cell phone and triangulate between 3 different cell towers and find you within 200 feet. Mm-hmm. And that was the start. That was the start of 911. They actually continued to refine that. The second thing we created was, today we have this old GeoMap thing. But at that time frame, one of the jobs I was in was trying to help the phone company figure out what they were going to do with 911. Mm. Because at that time, when you dial 911, an operator picked up and said, okay, no problem, give me the address, dispatch the person out there. Well, one time they dispatched we called it a paddy wagon, the big box ambulance, to a parking garage where a woman was in her car having her baby. And we wanted the ambulance to get there in time to help her out, because they called 911. The garage couldn't, paddy wagon couldn't.
We all know cell phone signals, especially early on, they didn't work very well.
Right. They couldn't get the paddy wagon through, and so we didn't have the geo mapping information to send a smaller ambulance. Same thing happened with
so you're saying even the ambulance was too big. Got it.
Same thing would happen. There was an incident in Detroit where someone called 911 for domestic violence that was happening next door, but next to them was a known gang house. So when the police showed up for domestic violence with their sirens and their lights flashing, they thought they were coming to get them. They opened fire on the police officers when they would actually go into the domestic disturbance. And so not knowing that information, and so the whole geo mapping process started, because we explained to people that if you're going to have a 911 infrastructure, you need to know where you're sending your people.
Yeah. So this goes back to that alignment of people and process.
Right.
That if the process and technology are not there to give the people, the officers or the ambulance, the responder personnel, if it's not there to give them the information that they need, then they're not able to perform the jobs or even put themselves in life and death situations.
These were times where some of this stuff, today we take our stuff for granted. This didn't exist.
I remember, I'm old enough to remember some of these things. I get
these things didn't exist at that time frame. And then here again, being a young kid with the opportunity to work with teams of people, very, very smart people, very, very technical people, people who had insight to things, and bringing them all together and having people work together as a team. Again, I started the whole process of bringing vendors and suppliers because some of the other experiences I had, because they were costly. You can't build something and think that you as your team inside the company are doing this, because you're not doing it by yourself. You're doing it with a bunch of other people, and having those other people not feel like they were just a supplier, but a partner.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I started when I first did in my career that kind of separated some of the results that we had as an idea.
Yep. Awesome. So I mentioned earlier my first book, From Orangutan to Rocket Scientist, and you're a rocket scientist, right? And but the story of the orangutan is something that's followed me through my whole career. So I used to have this PowerPoint slide that said there are 3 things required to change: tools, skills, and mindset. Mm-hmm. And I want to think about and sort of explore this a little bit. That there was one day I was at the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was sitting there at the orangutan cage. And there's this orangutan. There's a story on the board, right? And you can look it up on Google. People can look it up on Google. There was a story of an orangutan named Fu Manchu. And Fu Manchu kept escaping from the cage. And the head zookeeper, so we've been talking about being CEOs and leaders of companies and stuff. The head zookeeper, he was really upset, right? He's like, why are all my junior zookeepers, why are they letting the orangutans escape from the cage? Why are they being so careless? Until one day they saw Fu Manchu at the entrance to the cage, and he was over there, he was playing around. And all of a sudden, click, the lock opens up, the door opens up, Fu Manchu runs out, all the other orangutans go out and make a mess of the zoo. And they started to realize and think about this and look at it and say, how did he get out? Right? And as I'm sitting there, my kids are watching the animals at the zoo, and I'm reading this. thinking about a PowerPoint slide, thinking about tools, skills, and mindset, that Fu Manchu needed all three of these elements. He needed tools, skills, and mindset. And what they found when they tranquilized him was he had taken a piece of wire from the light. You know, they have the cages.
Yep.
He'd taken a piece of wire from the light, and he used that to pick the lock, right? And he got it open, he got out, and he took that piece of wire and he put it up by his gum line, right? And that when they found him, he had hidden this piece of wire, his tool.
Interesting.
He also had the skills, right? If you gave a key to a zebra, what would he do with it?
Right. Nothing.
Nothing. He'd look at it, he'd probably lick it, he'd probably snip it, lick it, try to eat it, and he'd be like, oh, that's not interesting, right? The zebra wants to get out of the cage.
Right.
A zebra wants to get out of the cage just as much as the orangutan does. But the zebra's not getting out of the cage because you can give him a key, but he doesn't have the skills to do it. And then finally, it's the mindset. If that orangutan, if Fu Manchu was happy eating bananas and have somebody else clean up his poop from behind him, he'd still be in the cage.
Right.
I would have never read this story, right? So I read this story and it came back to this what's required to change? Tools, skills, and mindset. And so you've made like I'm the original orangutan, right? But you've made these five transitions with different degrees. You keep upskilling yourself. You keep looking at and developing more and more skills and bringing along more and more tools. And you've got this mindset of reinvention that doesn't exist in everybody, right? For each of us, as I've gone through corporate and entrepreneurial and all these things. As you think about that, as you think about people who are planning for retirement, they need the tools, the skills, and the mindset.
That's right.
Those zookeepers, they took away that wire. They took away the tool. He still had the skills. He still had the mindset, but he couldn't go anywhere.
Right.
So you've made this transition where you're now helping people. Rocket science retirement, right? You're helping them to go through this. What are the tools, the skills, and the mindset that people need planning for retirement?
So let me describe a little bit about myself in that relationship. But you're right. You need the skill and you need the tools, which I've now have put a collage of different kinds of tools to help people think through their retirement. And then you need the mindset. And people, when they start thinking about retirement, they really got to be crystal clear on what is retirement and what does that vision of retirement look like for them.
So they got to have a mindset.
They got to
have that top.
Right. I go back and think about in my days growing up, in my early 20s and 30s and thinking about retirement and watching my parents retire and thinking that, okay, I'm gonna have this wonderful life of being able to quit working at 55 and go sit on my boat and just kind of enjoy life. That vision is gone.
So you've learned from your experiences here. All right, so tell us about that.
The average senior today retires with $70,000 in their 401k and trying to live off of less than $2,000 a month on Social Security for the rest of their life. And when I started seeing people struggling with this, I started asking myself, where am I in that scenario? And how do I prepare myself for retirement? Because the surprise was for me, my 61st birthday, I said, wow, it's here. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And that scared me to death. And it launched me into thinking about how do I help work with my family and how do we set money aside and start thinking about it? How do we get a vision of what we are going to look like in retirement and started putting some plans in place. I got up my license. I started working on trying to make sure I had an understanding of, and then I went through and said to myself, what I need is the right kind of tools. So I've got some software tools that I've purchased that I can simulate. Like we did at NASA. I can simulate your.
So you got the tools. You got tools available to help people.
To help people think
about it.
Yep. So we got those tools, and then the other piece is then that now I try to coach them on trying to put together a realistic mindset of what does retirement look like. Yeah. My dad taught me stay busy. So I plan to work till I'm 85, 95, 100 years old. Stay busy. That's the real key for people in retirement. So people have got to be thinking about how do I put those three things in place as they go through that process of retiring. And that's the challenge. And that's where I offer my opportunity. So, kind of go back to my story about the ministry. My dad wanted me to go into the church and be a pastor. My senior pastor wanted me to go into the church and work with people in the church. But it wasn't my calling. This is my calling. Helping people think through that process of retiring. I've made this not only my business, but I've also made it my ministry as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it's one of these things that I think there are a lot of people who dream about retirement, right? But in order to get there, we have to put in place, we have to get some tools, right? We have to understand basics of math and compound interest and things like that. Those are the tools, right? Then we also have to have the skills, right? And sometimes that gets into habits and behaviors of how do I set money aside, right? There's people like Dave Ramsey who kind of teach the habits and behaviors. Sometimes people criticize him because they say, well, his math isn't the perfect math.
Right.
But he also looks at it from the human habits and behaviors. What are the skills people need? How do I help them to create those, right? And then they've got to have the mindset that they're actually going to do it. Right. If any one of these pieces is missing, if people don't understand compound interest, or they don't develop the right habits and behaviors, or they don't have the right, sort of mindset that they're going to move forward and actually do something, then they're going to get to 65 years old and be in that position.
Right. And so one of my clients came to me and said, we don't know and understand any of this stuff. And I've got this money set aside to retire. And so what do I do? And so we developed a relationship working with him through his medical plans first, and then making sure that his life goals were set up and he understood where he was trying to go. And then we walked through the process of helping him understand how to put money aside and set it up for not only for this generation, but for the generation behind that and the generation behind it. Because if we go back and think about what our purpose on life is, it's to set up the next generation. I mean, that's one of the things that we want to do. Your children, my children, we want them to have a better life than we did. My parents did the same thing for us. They wanted us to have a better life. And so that investment, and so thinking through that whole process of making sure you set your children up and setting yourself up for a decent life, cost of living is going up like crazy. And so having the ability to be able to go to the grocery store in 2025 and then in 2050 to have the same kind of lifestyle that you had. Unfortunately, in our world today, there's going to be a bigger divide between those that have and those that have not. And so that middle class is slowly shrinking away. And so, but I want to help people think through those strategies to kind of put some money aside that will generate income streams for life. Because like I said earlier, it's not a function of having monies in an income. It's a matter of how much money you're going to have for the rest of your life that generates. You go to today's world, a senior who's 65 years old and is making probably around $30,000-$40,000, but they can convert whatever they've done up until now into an income stream of about $7,500 to $10,000 a month for the rest of their life, guaranteed, be the ones that will do well. Yeah. And putting yourself in that position can be a little challenging, especially if you didn't start early. I love the story about Colonel Sanders.
He reinvented himself a few times.
A few times as well. He's my hero because he created Kentucky Fried Chicken at age 66. And so that story gave me a little hope that it wasn't too late to reinvent myself one more time. One more time. Here again, a degree at 62, my doctorate at 62, thinking about what do you do with the rest of your life, hitting COVID like a lot of people did. And I really got sick. I almost died.
Wow.
That's a whole nother story, but I almost died. And so, but you have to be focused on kind of where you want to go when you start thinking about retirement.
Yeah. Well, Dr. John, thank you so much for coming all the way here to Chicago, out to the studio out here to talk about rocket science retirement, to talk about the alignment of people and process to accelerate performance, and have just an amazing discussion. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm so excited I got to meet you, to chat with you for the past hour or two here, and learn more about your story, and hopefully share a lot of this story with the world. Share with folks who can really see how you've impacted the world through reinventions and overcoming challenges, overcoming obstacles, to be a rocket scientist, to be a retirement specialist, to have so much passion for helping people. I think it's really an amazing story. And I just want to thank you for spending the time today with us in the studio.
And let me leave you with this departing words. I taught my daughter this. And it's a little cute saying that we kind of kid each other. We saw that at the funeral this weekend. And so she made the comment about, I'm still trying, Dad. And I said, what did I teach you? I said, trying is for others. Doing is for you. And you have to have that kind of push for yourself. I've eliminated the word try in my vocabulary.
I love it.
And you have to have that kind of drive. You want the kind of career, you want the kind of impact you want to have on the world, because we're all put here for a purpose. Find that purpose and deliver.
I love it. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dr. John. I sincerely appreciate it.